All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. After a short repose, we are back on air. Today we are talking about the evolution of preppers. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at it. All right, thanks again for joining us. Listen, sorry, we have some apologies to offer. We had a bit of a weird technical problem. We're going to leave it at that, that we were off the air and missed a couple of episodes. So thank you very much for sticking with us. These things happen. We're back at it. And today we want to talk about the evolution of preppers. What is a prepper? Can we simply leave the definition to you to decide? Can you wake up one morning, look yourself in the mirror, call yourself a prepper, and expect everybody else to accept that, right? Or does there actually need to be some quantifiable, some measurable envelope pressed out there to allow somebody into a club, a membership, let's call it, of being a prepper? I think it's it's actually not only something that I'm talking to you about today, it's a line of research that we do at my company, Preparedness Labs Incorporated, to understand how we define a prepper and then to get our arses out there, to say in an East Coast phrase, to get our arses out there in the public and start surveying and find out really what is the prevalency of preppers within a modern technologically enabled society. So that's what we're going to talk about here today, the evolution of preppers, why they're here, what they are, and a whole bunch of interesting conversations. So let's go, my friends. A prepper. It's generally accepted that the concept of emergency management evolved from the civil defense era, a transformation from the Cold War methodology for surviving a nuclear apocalypse to the management of a wider spectrum of more likely exogenous shocks. You know, preparedness has been the monkier of civil defense, converting from the evacuation process to counter pending arrival of foreign bomber fleets that we had in the 1960s. And if you ever want to look up that, they actually did the exercise in the northeast sector of Calgary, Alberta, in an actual evacuation for a pending bomber. You have to remember the early elements of the early stages of the Cold War. The only threat was Russian bombers coming over the pole, right? So they come over northern Canada. There'd be a whole bunch of radar lines that would pick them up. And you literally would have 6 hours, potentially up to 8 or 9 hours before they got to southern U.S. targets can launch and drop their bombs, right? They were still looking at standard gravity type bombs, short missive rocket bombs, but basically you had a really long time and advanced knowledge that they were coming. That all changed with the creation and the conversion to intercontinental ballistic missiles that led to the creation of basement bunkers. This is the idea that basically intercontinental ballistic missiles, which is the standard today, whether they're submarine launched or they're launched from mobile launchers or from silos in the ground, you're looking at probably about 26 to 27 minutes from one launched out of the ground in Russia till it landing somewhere in North America, right? You're not conducting any evacuation of any considerable amount. So by the time you get down to public notification, you're probably in the last 5 to 7 minutes. And so we understood that to be that all you can tell is the education in advance of this announcement was people were going to have to bunker at home. So there were government programs and a lot of information handed out how to build a nuclear survival bunker in your basement with household natural material or things that you could get at your local hardware store. This is what we did. So these terms have been synonymous, often leveraged by government agencies from public health, environment, fisheries, and a host of other interests. Preparedness just is something that whatever almost field you're in, it exists out there to some degree. To be prepared is to have undertaken a strategy comprised of both physical and cognitive initiatives to navigate a potential disruption, something that is beyond your control to influence. The association of titles with behaviors and idea is as old as humanity. We have been labeling each other in economic, political, cultural, and a myriad of ideological fashions for time immemorial. And currently we post across social media, we attach the latest memes, phrases, and song clips to events and associated populations. Like, perfect example, if you're a supporter of a certain politician, then you must be X, you believe in Y, and you want Z outcome, right? We assign that to people. So if I stand up and say, I am a supporter of Donald Trump, or I am a supporter of Joe Biden, right? The crowd is then going to say, I must believe in this because I support Trump, and I want this outcome if I support Biden, right? It doesn't matter whether I hold those beliefs or not. The population assigns that label to me, right? So irrespective that people have a wide range of reasons to support someone or something, we feel it inherently necessary to assign our predetermined definition to a set of behaviors or beliefs. There are extremes, obviously. If you kill another human being, you are a murderer. Sure, it might be in self-defense and justified under our penal system, but you're still a murderer. You still took the life of another human. You're just not a convicted one, right? Or you could say murder is the wrong label, right? It depends on your view. So when considering how to view and understand the behavior of humans that would classify individuals as preppers, we're opening up a can of worms. So a general survey that we conducted at Preparedness Labs Incorporated in 2023 on how individuals define preparedness led to roughly a 65-35 split between the possession of physical goods and skills, respectively. That wider description we're going to publish in our upcoming September 2024 issue of the Journal of Preparedness in Canada. It's available free of charge. You don't have to give me your email or anything. Just go over to our website, www.preparednesslabs.ca. The first 2 issues of the journal are there, and come September, we'll announce that the journal, including this kind of data, will be there. But most definitions, as they mature, evolve a growing number of fairly strict criteria to be considered for membership. In our effort to codify a prepper, we need to provide a series of measurable and non-subjective variables that, when assessed, lead to meeting a clearly established minimum level to be included in the definition, right? If we want to be able to determine, it's far more difficult than simply saying they're a prepper, or the fallacy that because something, someone says something, they are. If I believe I am X, that means I believe it. It, however, does not make it so to the wider public, right? If I say I'm a tree, I may believe I'm a tree, but the rest of the population is going to take one look at me and nobody's going to accept the fact that I'm a tree, right? This has to be at first accepted as a norm, something that is collectively considered definable and generally accepted by a population. Not the situation. It's not whether we believe it, believe it's right or just. It's just whether we agree it to be correct. Let's try to stepping on stones here. When you look at the current ideological frame of different concepts in society, we in fact can see that people exist that don't fit our standard definitions, right? They claim to be something. At some point, society have to accept that definition is rational and actually exists, right? Simply because somebody professes that they are something does not make them that, right? All that means is that they believe they're that. To be collectively accepted by society, society has to agree that, in fact, that set of conditions can exist. It's a bit of a nuanced complexity, but I think it's important when we're looking at defining population. So whether we're defining an ideology, a political correctness, something not politically correct, or something, we have to have fairly strict measurements, right? If you don't fill this criteria, then you're not that thing. You may be something else, but you don't get membership in this definition unless you meet a certain set of criteria, right? So to define a prepper, we need a set of measurable variables. One that should be grounded in evidence or at least attributable to a known theoretical framework. We here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated, we've gone with building a theoretical framework, and our research has led us away from the personal and subjective announcements to constructing this framework. And again, that's back to the fact that just because you call yourself a prepper, that can't be the level of measurement, right? Otherwise, there are no definitions in the world. If somebody can simply say, I'm a prepper, get up today and say they're a prepper, then everybody can be a prepper tomorrow, right? Otherwise, then nobody's a prepper, right? Hopefully you understand what I'm trying to get at here. To be very clear that membership in a definition requires you to meet certain criteria. And whether you may want to be a prepper, but if you don't meet the criteria for prepper, you're not. You're simply not. It doesn't matter what you say or you profess to be. That's the argument we're trying to make. We need to set a defendable level. Let's be clear. I have to be able to defend the levels that I assert require you to be a member of the prepper family and the prepper club. Let's call it that, So we begin with the fact that as a society, we live in a technologically enabled, interconnected modern society where over time, at the macro level, residents have traded responsibility for the provision of services to an external agency for remuneration. We've decided not to be responsible to build our own houses. We ask a contractor to do so, and then we provide payment. In the past, our ancestors all built their own houses and then all rebuilt them themselves after a disaster. Extending that fact to the generally accepted definition of how such a society functions, we look at it through the provision of modern-day critical infrastructure, or in the modern idea, there's an ideology about calling it lifelines. I'll set that aside. I think it's perfectly ridiculous, but whatever. Critical infrastructure, right? Society is enabled by the successful operation and continuous delivery of 10 sectors of critical infrastructure, 16 in the United States, 10 in Canada. At the macro level, society requires critical infrastructure to function, and when it fails across any of the sectors, it presents a significant issue to some element of the population. The degree to which the loss impacts individuals is unique to their situation. So for some, the loss of public transit is a non-event. It's just irrelevant. For some, it is their form of transportation to work, and without it, they lose their income. Potentially catastrophic. Some who have made a decision to lessen the potential impact of a loss of critical infrastructure would be considered to be adopting a measure of preparedness. Whether that be an emergency kit, a lithium power bank, or food cultivation, the intent is to be able to replicate the lost critical infrastructure for a period of time. That effort is a cognitive decision, a strategy undertaken by someone who has chosen to limit the impact on themselves and their family from the failure of the social contract with the provider of that critical infrastructure sector. This is variable 1. Now, if someone believes there is a potential for a loss of critical infrastructure that would impact their normal activities and chooses to create a strategy to replicate that element of CI, this needs a time frame. We have to choose, the amount of stored fuel for our generators, the amount of food we choose to cultivate in a harvest, the level of skill sets we choose to be adopted. The decision to replicate CI must contain a longitudinal element. Otherwise, it is not a logical decision. This is variable 2. Now, what we do know is that critical infrastructure failures are reasonably infrequent. In most modern locations, the myriad of trusted systems continuously works without our consideration. We wake up every day and assume that the lights, the cell network, the internet, potable water, transportation, manufacture, government, and a host of other services will operate, right? This is our state of dependency, one that requires oversight and management. Just think about all of the things around your house that when you got up this morning, you just assumed would be working, right? And you do this every day. Now, if we think about that dependency across our different governance systems, agencies have been allocated the authority and responsibility to manage a sector of critical infrastructure. So, for example, all 10 in Canada exist with a public policy envelope. They exist within a framework of legislative, regulatory, and administrative authorities provided by the population through their elected officials to permit the safe operation until it doesn't. We know that historically, roughly 94% of critical infrastructure in North America is restored after 14 days of loss, with the remaining accommodation of either total failure, for example, a fire has destroyed the water treatment plant, to a longer reconstruction effort like replacing the roads lost in southern BC after the atmospheric river. A confidence in the government system is to restore the CI within the normalized time frame is widely held in society. All of the surveys that we have done and that other researchers have done at the macro level, populations generally believe that 14 days is a normal extent to which preparedness ends, right? That's just generally accepted, held belief that we understand it as of right now. But you understand that the social contracts exist. By default, not by your choice, by a whole bunch of ancestral decisions made over the last 50 to 100 years, we've turned over all of these traditional responsibilities that were ours over to a system, and we pay taxes into the system. We pay specific fees for our internet, our cell phone access, things like that. We just assume that these will work. And when they do fail, because they do periodically fail, there is an impact, and that impact will be different depending on who you are and how you're exposed, right? This is why preparedness is not a PDF-able thing. You can't create a single-page PDF, tell somebody to follow these steps to be prepared, right? It doesn't exist, because if we understand society as a reflection of dependency and exposure to critical infrastructure, that does now governed by an external source that is supposed to be through people you elect to put the right positions, the right authorities in place, then you can't put that down on a PDF, right? It is illogical and just out to lunch if somebody tries to tell you that. But we also know that the political and economic situation across the world is a challenge. You know, whether that be complicated by conflict or other exogenous shocks, stability and calm seems to be the anomaly right now when we look around the world. That provides for a host of conspiracy theories about motivations of political opponents, you know, or the oppression of some economic system, and we start to stew distrust. Recent surveys from OECD notes that there's a plurality of populations, which means about 50%, across the developed world that hold distrusting views in their government and institution. Those very systems that we've said earlier provide the responsibility or provide the oversight and the management of the delivery of critical infrastructure. Extrapolating that, we're arguing here that there is an increased loss of confidence in our government systems, coexisting with a high degree of dependency on critical infrastructure that they oversee or directly provide. That imbalance increases your risk. You know, persuading an element of the population that their dependency on and exposure to externally provided critical infrastructure is less and less advantageous. That belief that people hold, or some people hold, leads to a loss of confidence in the government to execute its assigned task. That is variable number 3. Now, we've isolated these 3 measurable variables we believe are associated with a unique set of individuals. Let's call it membership qualifications. They are the decision to be able to provide a sector of CI for personal use when the sector of CI fails, to have this for a period of time exceeding normal recommendations of science, and distrust in the government's ability to deliver CI. The next challenge is understanding that minimal level. How do we define that, right? What level gets you into the club? These are subjective, but they're defendable if the evidence to support the assignment of that level is there. An analogy that we consider as a reference might be hurricane classifications that are currently done simply on wind speed alone. It could be argued that there are far more variables to consider. However, the Saffir-Simpson scale is grounded not just in wind speed, but in the measurable damage likely caused by those winds. That's where the classification lie. The scale doesn't measure other damaging effects of a hurricane, storm surge, tornadoes, flooding, that type of thing, as these are too difficult to provide repeatable and generalizable results. Hence, we accept the value of this scale, that it is grounded in a measurable variable of both wind and damage, but that there are also other confounding variables that are too complex to include. So the current stage of research that we're at right now is to define those levels. We're working on it. It's a working definition right now. It's not written in stone. It's not on a tablet. At this time, our evidence leads to the conclusion that a prepper fits the following definition. Drum roll, please. A prepper is someone who holds a distrust in the government's ability to provide the services for which they are responsible and has undertaken a strategy to provide for that failure for a significant period of time. Now, based upon that data, we extrapolate this to a prepper can provide for all critical to their personal situation sectors of CI without external support for a period exceeding 14 days, right? So how do we measure that? This is always a great debate that's out there. So we measure a prepper by first determining which sectors of critical infrastructure are essential to how they run their lives. I mean, you may think this is a very simplistic approach, but our data shows that other than access to power, food, and water, which we all understand in a modern technologically enabled society, food and water are elements of life, but power is also required just because we live in the society we do. The remaining 7 sectors of CI have a widely differentiating level of dependency across rural, suburban, urban population, cultural effects. There are so many different combinations on there that it is impossible for anyone to sit down and say, these are the most important sectors of critical infrastructure beyond those 3. So once we've defined, based upon your situation, what sectors of critical infrastructure are essential dependency for you, we then determine whether individuals have the ability to replicate that sector for a period exceeding the normalized restoration timeline of 14 days. And finally, we survey their confidence in government systems. And this point is important, right? This is not a confidence in political parties. We don't care about political parties. We don't measure your belief in political parties. We just think that's a ridiculous variable. We measure your confidence in government systems and the agencies entrusted with the sectors of critical infrastructure through what we call a Likert scale questionnaire. And we've all done those. Those are the 0 to 5. Measure your level of confidence in the Public Health Agency of Canada, 1 to 5. Measure your confidence in the Department of National Defense, 1 to 5. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Extrapolate that to the United States of America. Tell us about the FBI, how you feel about the FBI, your level of confidence in FEMA, your level of confidence in the National Weather Service, the NOAA administration, NASA. Like, you can measure people's personal level of confidence in the ability of an agency to execute their mission based upon a Likert scale. So 0 confidence, maximum confidence, some confidence, neutral confidence, high confidence. You know what I mean? So you have a measurement of level, right? The results of these 3 variables determine whether they've earned membership in the definition. So this is an evolving measure line of inquiry that we have here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated. We believe it to be important to codify a prepper beyond those who define or labeled by others, right? We think it's important to, not just in preppers, but in general sense, that society loses its mind, let's call it that, when you can just call yourself something without actually being that, right? So, for example, I spent 28 years in the Canadian Army, a couple of deployments overseas. I'm a member of a gunfighter club because of a certain set of things. I'm a member of a certain set of clubs because I passed a certain set of courses and qualifications. I'm the member of a certain club, but I'm not a member of the Special Operations Forces, right? I never worked with them. I never undertook any of their qualifications. I don't hold any qualifications that would make me a member of a SOF community or a Special Forces unit. I then am not in the position to come out tomorrow and say, I'm now a member of a Special Forces, right? That would be ridiculous and I would be quashed, rightly so. It's like, am I a Ranger or am I not a Ranger? Can somebody show me a Ranger tab? That means something, right? I don't have a Ranger tab. I'm not a Ranger, right? I have certain different qualifications that other people may not. But memberships in definitions require evidence. The reason being, otherwise anybody can call anybody whatever they want, and we all know where that is going in the modern society. So we have to be able to find a definition. And what we do in scientific research, and this is why I find it fascinating, the intersection of scientific research and the world of preparedness, right? What we do is we go in and we figure out what is preparedness and what is not, right? Because what we want to take away is the subjective belief, right? And this is something that's really hard for people to swallow, but this is the basis of scientific inquiry. I don't care what your opinion is, and nobody does, right? It doesn't matter what you believe as a prepper. It doesn't matter. What matters is, what does evidence show us is a prepper? That's what matters, right? I don't care about people's opinions, and I don't care about people's beliefs, right? Full stop. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you think. And people find that very offensive, oppressive. They don't like it. They turn off the podcast. Thanks for staying. Or they get angry, right? But that's the reality. If we don't put a definition with qualifications on things that are measurable, right? Not just subjective. Not subjective is okay if you can measure it. But somebody just saying, I am X, doesn't make them X. There has to be a set of qualifications that they have to meet to get X, right? I have 3 university degrees, okay? For each one of my university degrees, my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD, there were certain criteria that I had to meet. I can't put post-nominals after my name. I can't call myself Dr. D without actually having a defendable qualification that's very clearly set out the standards that I had to meet, the steps I had to take, and the examinations I had to pass, and the considerations I need to keep to maintain and call myself a doctor, right? Full stop. That's it. Like, you can't argue whether now we can debate whether the measurements are high enough, low enough, but we can't live in a society where we say there is no measurement for anything. You just get to be whatever you think you are, etc. That leads to absolute chaos. And I think we're kind of feeling and sensing that in today's world. And I think we need to put a little bit more codification on it in the world of preparedness. The rest of the world, I think we're going to have some great debates in the coming years and great discussions on that. But in my line of inquiry, in my line of expertise, in my niche where I spend all of my research and evidence time in understanding individual, family, and community resilience through a frame of preparedness, it is important to defend these measurements. It's important to put out your measurements in public. That's why we're doing this podcast today. How I define a prepper, the 3 variables we're using right now, and the measurement of each one of those, and the levels required to get into becoming a called a prepper. So you may disagree with me, and I'd love to hear your feedback. We're going to have a bunch of stuff out on social media shortly talking about how to define a prepper and what is the definition of a prepper and why definitions matter. Want your feedback. Love to have it. Continue to set us a line whenever you have feedback for the show. Remember, we have a website, www.insidemycanoehead.ca, a separate website just for this podcast. It has everything there you need. It has links over to our parent company, Preparedness Labs Incorporated. And listen, there's a button there called Buy Me a Coffee. If you appreciate the things that we do here and what we talk about in now season 11 and nearing on 280 episodes, buy us a coffee. Very simple. $5 Canadian and a lot less American. Buy me a cup of coffee. I'm fueled by great, black, simple coffee. I appreciate everyone out there, all of the words of support you've had for all of us. And Thank you very much. Stay safe. Take care.